It is indeed my honor to welcome all the guests who are present today for a wonderful evening of thought-provoking ideas and discussion. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community was founded in 1889 by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in Qadian, a small hamlet in India. For over 100 years, it has grown and now present, established in over 190 countries with over tens and millions of followers across the world. But we are here today to celebrate one of the institutions that he established. The institution of interfaith dialogue is almost over 100 years old in our community. It's an institution in which we engage followers of many faiths, even followers of no faith, to discuss the ideas of concern to everyone. Tonight is one of those nights. The format today, while regimented, remains really informal. What you will have is two brief presentations from each of the speakers, giving you the overview of the topic and overview of their faith. They're about 5 minutes each. These two final presentations will be followed by more detailed 20 minutes each presentation on the topics of today. That topic is crucifixion of Jesus in his life and death. The speakers will follow their scriptures and comment from their understanding of the Holy Quran and the Bible. After the presentation, there will be an opportunity for all the members present to ask questions. I see each of you have already received blank cards. You can write your questions. We will take all of them in the sequence that we will follow. So without further ado, I would like to request Tony Costa to come over first to give a brief note. By way of introduction, Tony has earned a BA and an MA in study of religion from the University of Toronto. He is currently a PhD candidate at Radboud University in Netherlands in New Testament Studies. Tony is also a member of the Society of Biblical Literature and the Evangelical Philosophical Society. His area of expertise is biblical and systemic theology, cults, the New Age movement, and comparative world religions. Tony is an adjunct professor at the Toronto Baptist Seminary. He is also an ordained minister. As a Christian apologist, Reverend Costa gives reasons for the valid belief in Christianity and also advocates the unique claims of Jesus Christ. And looking at his website today, I was impressed how many endorsements he has received. So please, Mr. Welcome, Reverend Costa.
Well, thank you so much, and wassalamu alaikum to our Muslim friends here this evening. It is a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I also want to extend our warm thanks to your hospitality and the lovely dinner that you served us tonight. I'd like to begin tonight by giving a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be dealing with the crucifixion of Jesus and the death of Jesus, but it would be an injustice for me to deliver a message on the death of Jesus without mentioning the most important component of the Christian faith, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. Reading today on the alislam.org website, I noticed that it said, quote, "Modern Christianity rests on the belief that Jesus died on the cross." Nothing could be further from the truth. Modern Christianity does not rest on the fact that Jesus of Nazareth died on the cross, but rather that Jesus of Nazareth was raised from the dead. If Jesus had merely died on the cross, the Christian movement would not have begun. There would be no Christianity. Because, as with other Messianic movements of the first century, every Messianic movement had one thing in common. The moment the Messianic leader was dead, they either dissipated, they removed themselves, they simply disappeared from the pages of history, or they'd find another Messianic leader to follow. In the case of Jesus of Nazareth, his death would have been literally the death blow to the Christian movement. What I want to do tonight is take the course that the historian takes. What are the earliest sources for the historic Jesus? What are the documents that historians and academics use to reconstruct the life of Jesus of Nazareth? Those documents I submit to you tonight, the earliest documents that we have in our possession are the New Testament documents. All historians go to the New Testament to rediscover and reconstruct the life of Jesus. When we look at the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, what we notice in this particular gospel that Neil read to you this evening is that Jesus had a consciousness of his incoming death. In the Gospel of Mark, he says that as they were going to Jerusalem, he told his disciples that he was going to be betrayed, that he was going to be handed over to the chief priests and teachers of the law. He said that he was going to be condemned to death and that he would be handed over to the Gentiles, who would mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And 3 days subsequently, he would rise again. What's particularly interesting about this passage is the fact that Jesus predicts his own death. Not only does he predict his death, he predicts the place that it will take place. He mentions who will betray him. He specifies the particular people who will execute him. He mentions the people who will hand him over in judgment to be killed. And he even mentions the duration of time between his death and his subsequent resurrection. Jesus also understood his death as a ransom. In fact, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, verse 45, Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." It is recognized by all scholars of the New Testament that Jesus of Nazareth died by crucifixion. And what I mean by scholarship is, I'm not just referring to conservative scholars, I mean the wide spectrum of scholars, from liberal to conservative. All scholars of the New Testament unanimously agree that Jesus of Nazareth died by crucifixion. And as we're going to see tonight, the most liberal critics will admit that point of the historical Jesus. All scholars are agreed that on the night before Jesus was crucified, he shared a meal with his disciples, a Passover meal. And in this Passover meal, we are told that he took two particular elements, the bread and the cup, and he infused these elements with a new interpretation. He specified that the bread would represent his body. He said that the cup would represent his blood, which was to be shed for many. No scholar that I know of doubts the historical accuracy of this account. Moreover, we have to understand that Jesus' death cannot be fully understood or appreciated without an understanding of the Old Testament. We must recognize that the historical Jesus was a Jew. And as a Jew, he not only practiced Judaism, but Jesus of Nazareth had a messianic consciousness. He was aware of the fact that he had been chosen by God, sent by God as Messiah, not only as Messiah, but he recognized himself as the unique, special Son of God, and he recognized that he was sent to be the atonement of the sins of the world. In fact, if you look at the prophets of the Old Testament, the prophets not only indicated the birthplace of the Messiah, being Bethlehem, they also specified that this child to be born, this son to be given, would be the wonderful counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Moreover, we're told in Psalm 22 that the suffering servant of the Lord would die a humiliating death. His hands and his feet would be pierced through. And in Isaiah 53, the prophet tells us that the righteous servant of the Lord would pour out his life in death to make atonement for the people of God. And so it is important for us to understand, to bear in mind, that the discussion here tonight should not be one of theological presuppositions or philosophical presuppositions. The question is, where does the evidence point? What do the earliest documents tell us? And if we are going to discover the truth of the matter tonight, I'm asking you tonight to lay aside your prejudices, lay aside your presuppositions. Let's look at the documents themselves. What do the documents tell us? And I will submit to you tonight that in my presentation, as we go through the various points, I want to point out that every point that I'm going to mention to you tonight is agreed upon by the overwhelming majority of scholarship of the New Testament today. And so the position that I submit to you tonight is that Jesus of Nazareth came into the world for a specific purpose. He came to give his life as a ransom for many. He came to bring peace. He came to bring reconciliation between fallen humanity and God. And he did it with a consciousness that he was fulfilling the words of the prophets of the Old Testament. And this is crucial for us to understand because Jesus interpreted his mission and his identity in terms of the Old Testament, and the early Christians also understood Jesus in terms of the Old Testament scriptures. And I submit to you tonight that if we really want to hear the message of Jesus, if we really want to hear the true message of Jesus, we have to go to the early witnesses, those who heard him, those who talked to him, those who listened to him, those who walked with him. And I submit to you that what we find is a verification of the New Testament witness. Thank you.
You see, quite passionate argument. One of the tasks I have is to keep things on time as well. I would like to request now to Mr. Mukhtar Cheema to come over, and by way of introduction, when I asked him to give me, I would have written a much longer bio, but when I asked him, he sent a very brief one. So it's a dilemma for me to read only what he has given or say a lot more that I know of. Mukhtar Cheema got his BSc in Physics, Maths, and Statistics from Punjab University in Pakistan. After that, he took on a seminary course, 7-year-long intensive religious studies in Islamic University in Rabwa, Pakistan. His specialty there was the comparative study of the world religions. After graduating, he served as a religious minister for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Pakistan for 5 years, then in West Africa, a country called Ghana, for 4 years. He moved to the United States of America and served the community there for 14 years. And we are very fortunate that since 2003, he's been serving the community in Canada. Please welcome Mukhtar Cheema.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين ومكروا ومكر الله والله خير الماكرين إذ قال الله يا عيسى إني متوفيك ورافعك إلي ومطهرك من الذين كفروا وجاعل الذين اتبعوك فوق الذين كفروا إلى يوم القيامة رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tony, respected audience, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be unto you. The topic which is given to me this time, that is crucifixion, death or life, whether Jesus died on the cross or not. According to the Holy Quran, according to the traditions of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to Old Testament, according to New Testament, Jesus did not die on the cross. The verse of the Holy Quran I recited before you, that is a wonderful verse and giving the whole picture of what happened. And that is, they planned and Allah planned, and Allah is the best planner. when God said to Jesus, "O Jesus, I will cause thee to die, and then exalt thee to myself." What was the planning? To kill Jesus on the cross to prove that he was accursed by God. According to the law of Moses, that is accursed death. And the prophet like Jesus cannot die accursed death. And this is what is mentioned in this verse of the Holy Quran. They planned to kill him, they planned to crucify him, but God had his own planning, and he was saved by Almighty Allah the Creator, and God gave glad tidings to Jesus, and that is قال الله يا عيسى إني متوفيك ورافعك إلي, that they will never succeed in killing you, they will never succeed in crucifying you, but I will cause thee to die a natural death, and I will exalt thee to myself. They wanted to degrade Jesus. They wanted to show that he was impostor. They wanted to show that he was not a true person. And God wanted to prove that he was sent by Almighty Allah the Creator. God wanted to prove that he was a true person. God wanted to prove that he was really a great person in the history of mankind. So God helped him, and he did not die on the cross. According to Old Testament, according to New Testament, according to the Holy Quran. And during my lecture, I will be quoting the Holy Quran, I will be quoting the Old Testament, and I will be quoting the New Testament to prove that really Jesus did not die on the cross, and if he did not die on the cross, there's no resurrection at all. He was alive, he remained alive, and he had a great mission to accomplish, and that was, he himself said, "I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And he said, "I have other sheep which are not this fold. I will call my sheep. One day there will be one fold and one shepherd." And really he accomplished his mission. He was a very great person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. As I mentioned earlier, now we will have more detailed presentation by each of the presenters, elaborating on their thesis and the arguments that they would wish to put forward. And way of housekeeping, I would appreciate if people can write their questions down as they come to their mind. And when they write those questions, they should also write to whom they want the question to be addressed to. They can address the question to Mr. Cheema, to Reverend Costa, or to both of them, not to me. And I know people keep calling me chairperson. I'm a moderator. I'm no chairperson here. But nevertheless, that will help us organize our questions as well and take it from there. And normally what we do in these events is that we take those questions first, which pertain to the topic at hand. And afterwards, once we're done with those, then we'll be taking over the rest of the questions as well, and we go as long as we can. So without further delay, Reverend Costa, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As I said in my opening presentation, I'm going to be referring to the facts that historians and scholars do use for the reconstruction of the life of Jesus. Now, saying something doesn't make it true. You shouldn't believe something because someone says it's true. You should believe something if it's true. Believing something doesn't merely make it true. We have to do better than that. We have to present evidence. We have to present facts. And so let's look then at the earliest documents that we have. Let's consistently look at them and consistently cite these documents that we allude to. What we do want to avoid tonight is selective reading, picking what I call the eeny, meeny, miny, mo game with the Bible. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, this one stays, this one goes, because I don't like it. We have to be consistent with the text. So then, what then do we learn from historical inquiry concerning the historical Jesus? The first point that historians and scholars are agreed on is the fact that Jesus of Nazareth died by crucifixion. The late Robert Funk, who was the chair of the Jesus Seminar, no friend of Christianity, stated that the crucifixion of Jesus was one indisputable fact that we know about him. Raymond Brown states in his classic work, The Death of the Messiah, in 2 volumes, he states, quote, "Historically, Jesus' death was the most public moment of his life. what we have to realize is that what convinces this whole spectrum of historians about this fact of the historical Jesus? Well, what convinces them is not only the internal evidence that we have from the New Testament, because all the Gospels set out that Jesus of Nazareth died. The letters of Paul set out. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 to 4, we have there what scholars call the earliest creed in Christianity. Paul breaks down for us something that he received from the apostles of Jesus, Peter, James, and John, which he visited after his encounter with the risen Christ. He says, I'm passing on to you what I received from them. 3 things. Number 1, Christ died according to the Scriptures. Point 2, that he was buried. Point 3, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. James Dunn, the British New Testament scholar, tells us that this creed is the earliest recorded creed that we have in the New Testament. A creed is a statement of belief. And Professor Dunn tells us that this creed, Jesus died, was buried, was raised again, dates within months after the crucifixion of Jesus. So what we find here is that the farthest back that we go to the historical Jesus, to the followers of Jesus, there was this belief that Jesus not only died, but that he was raised by God, and that he died for the sins of his people, that he came to redeem them from. The other thing we have to notice is not only do we have internal evidence, scholars look at internal evidence, we also have external evidence. What do writers outside of the New Testament tell us? When we investigate the writings of people like Suetonius and Tacitus, the Roman writers, and the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, and we look at the Greek writer Mars Serapion, and the Jewish Talmud, all of them agree that Jesus of Nazareth was executed by crucifixion. Every one of them agrees on this point. But not only do we have internal evidence, external evidence, we even have medical evidence. A number of medical journals have been conducted on the effects of crucifixion on the human body. And in fact, a number of years ago, the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1986 published an article on the physical death of Jesus Christ, in which they come to the conclusion that after the flogging that Jesus of Nazareth received, the fact that he was so tired, according to the Gospels, he couldn't even carry his cross. They needed Simon of Cyrene to help him. This indicates an excessive loss of blood, excessive exhaustion, and the conclusion of this medical report finds that Jesus died, perhaps, of a cardiac arrest on the cross. We also have evidence of this from the spear wound that was inflicted to his side. We can talk about that a little more below. The other thing we have to bear in mind is that the death of Jesus is founded upon the Jewish idea of sacrifice and atonement. Now, in Islam, historically, the Sunni scholar Yusuf Ali points out that the idea of atonement is foreign to Islam. Now, that may be for Sunni Islam. There may be differences among the Shiites and Ahmadiyyas and others, but the idea of atonement is foreign because the Quran says that each one of you shall carry your own burden. You shall pay for your own sins. But in the Jewish Christian view, the idea of atonement is that the sinner is so vile before God because of his sin that he needs cleansing to stand before a holy God. All scholars are of agreement that if Jesus died and stayed dead, the Christian movement would never have begun. Now let's look at some linguistic evidence. When we look at the New Testament, what we find, for instance, in the earliest Gospel of Mark, Mark tells us that when Jesus died, he uses a particular Greek word that is unmistakable. He says in Greek, "Hode Jesus aphes phonin megalin exipnesin." When Jesus cried out with a loud voice, he gave up the ghost. Luke's Gospel uses the same word. Now, what does this word, exipnesin, mean? Well, if you look at Ioannidis Greek-English lexicon, which is an academic text which defines these words for us, this is what they say. They say that this word comes from the Greek root ekpuneo, and it means to breathe out, to engage in the final act of dying, to die, to breathe one's last. And they quote Mark 15, verse 37, in support of that. I submit to you that even the language that the gospel writers use, such as giving up the ghost, indicates that this was the technical language for dying in the Greek text. Now, if we want to refute that, we're going to have to explain why the gospel writers used the technical Greek word that means to die, to breathe one's last, not to go unconscious. Now, the swoon theory that is advocated by Ahmadiyya Islam is nothing new. It existed prior to the coming of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. In fact, back in 1835, the New Testament critic, radical critic, David Frederick Strauss, in his book Das Leben Jesu, The Life of Jesus Critically Examined, was responding to this idea of a swoon theory. And as far back as 1835, David Strauss said that this cannot explain the evidence that we have within the Gospels, and most of all, it cannot explain the rise of Christianity. Because how is it that a movement such as Christianity would worship this man whom they called Lord and Son of God, if in fact he had simply merely swooned, passed out, revived in the tomb, and then went off to Kashmir, India, and died at the ripe old age of 120? Impossible, Strauss says. And he's no friend of Christianity. What compelled him to come to this conclusion? The evidence. That's what we're after tonight, folks. Why do you believe what you believe? Do you believe it because your parents taught you that? Why do you believe it? If the Quran says in Surah 4, Ayah 157, that he was neither crucified nor killed, it only seemed so to them, I submit to you, what is more credible? A text that comes 600 years after the fact, written in a language that was foreign to the language of Jesus. From what we know of Muhammad, Muhammad did not know Greek. There was no Greek New Testament in Saudi Arabia until at least 850 of the Common Era, which means 200 years later, after Muhammad's death, was there an Arabic translation in Saudi Arabia. He had no access to this language. But yet, we are expected to believe a document that comes 600 years later, when we have the primary documents before us. Well, we can't just rest here on the death of Jesus, because Christianity would be nothing without the resurrection. The second point that scholars are agreed on is the honorable burial of Jesus. According to John A.T. Robinson of Cambridge University, Dr. Robinson says that the honorable burial of Jesus is one of the earliest and best attested facts that we have of Jesus, his honorable burial by his disciple, Joseph of Arimathea. Now, we have his death, we have his burial, and now we have the third point I'd like to bring out, and that is the discovery of the empty tomb of Jesus. What is interesting about this discovery is that all four Gospels mention it. We have four independent witnesses that bear witness to the discovery of the empty tomb of Jesus. So much so that, again, the most radical scholar will admit that the tomb was empty. They don't know how it got empty, but they know that the evidence is so compelling that the tomb of Jesus was found empty 3 days after his death. Not only was it discovered to be empty, but lo and behold, who discovers the empty tomb? Women. Disciples of Jesus, who were women, discovered his empty tomb. And this would be a shocker. In the first century, the witness of women was zilch. They had no credibility whatsoever. And yet here's the gospel records telling us that these women came and were the first discoverers of the empty tomb of Jesus. Now, what do scholars tell us about the empty tomb of Jesus? Well, according to Jacob Kramer, who is an Austrian specialist on the resurrection, he says, quote, by far, most exegetes hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements concerning the empty tomb. Professor D.H. Van der Leen points out, and I think his quote here is very, very instructive. He says, quote, it is extremely difficult, listen very carefully, it is extremely difficult to object to the empty tomb on historical grounds. Those who deny it do so on the basis of theological or philosophical presuppositions. What Dr. Van der Leen is saying here is that you cannot deny the empty tomb on historical grounds because the evidence is overwhelming for it. If you do deny it, it's because you have either a theological prejudice or you have a philosophical prejudice. Now, the onus is not on Christians to prove the death of Jesus. The evidence, the academic world has granted that to us. The onus is on those who dispute the fact that he died for them to prove otherwise. And so I'm waiting to hear tonight some compelling reasons why Jesus of Nazareth did not die. And if we're going to quote passages from the New Testament, we have to quote them in context. We have to quote them accurately and consistently, the way our Muslim friends would expect us to treat the Quran. If I'm going to quote the Quran, I want to quote it accurately. I don't want to take it out of context, because to do so would be to abuse the text of the Quran. I want to respect the text, interpret it in context, and interpret it consistently. And so we have to reciprocate, as Muslims and Christians, we have to reciprocate that right for ourselves. Respect each other's scriptures, and it doesn't mean taking them out of context to suit your theology, because I don't want to take the Quran out of context to suit my theology. We read it in its proper context. The fourth point concerning the historical Jesus is his post-mortem appearances. That is to say, that following Jesus' death and his burial, the disciples of Jesus experienced Jesus alive again. Now, the Ahmadiyya position, of course, is that Jesus wasn't really dead. He simply swooned and revived. But if you look at the accounts in the Gospels themselves, you don't just have a merely human Jesus appearing to his disciples. Take, for example, John chapter 20. And I was noting in your website yesterday, as I was reading it, alislam.org, that they pointed out that in John 20, you have a very human Jesus, and he's got the scars in his hands and on his side. Very true. But how did he get in there with the doors locked? How did he get in the room while the doors were locked? Now that is not a human, merely natural human being. Someone entered into a room while the doors are locked. That is a resurrected, supernatural person, which is what Christians believe, that the resurrection body is a supernatural body. Professor Gerd Ludemann points out, quote, "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." And this, folks, point 1, 2, 3, and 4, the death of Jesus, his burial, his resurrection, his appearances, constitute the origin of the Christian way. Now, what we have to answer tonight is another question, and that is this. If Jesus of Nazareth did not really die, if Jesus of Nazareth simply swooned on the cross and revived, then we must answer the question tonight, why did the early Christians speak of that as resurrection? Why didn't they refer to him as revived, returned? Why didn't they speak of him in those terms? Why did they use the term which means both in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, resurrection means the raising of the dead. And in Islam, the belief is that in the last day, Allah will raise the dead and judge them. And so, if the early followers of Jesus did not believe that Jesus really died, why did they refer to his post-crucifixion state as resurrection, being risen from the dead? That is the language that means that someone has died and someone has been raised to life. Once again, Professor Raymond Brown says this: the choice of resurrection language was not an inevitability for the early Jews who believed in Jesus. To the contrary, its choice must be explained. For while there was an expectation among many Jews of the resurrection of the dead in the last times, there was no expectation of the resurrection of a single man from the dead, separate from and preliminary to the general resurrection. And so what Professor Brown is saying is that we have to explain the use of this kind of resurrection language. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, then why did the early followers of Jesus use that language of Jesus? But we also must explain something else. Why did Jesus of Nazareth predict his own death and interpreted it as a sacrificial kind of death? Look at the Old Testament sacrifices. All of those victims that were sacrificed, those sheep and those goats and those bulls, they were all ritually slaughtered. And their blood was poured on the altar. And in the New Testament, Jesus is called the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. Jesus not only refers to himself in these types of terms, he speaks of himself as the one who lays down his life for his sheep. No one takes it from me, he says. I lay my life down willingly, only to take it up again. And he told the Jewish leaders of his day, destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I will raise it up again. And the scripture says, after he was risen from the dead, the disciples remembered that he had said this. Now, one thing that all religious leaders have in common are the following. They all died, and they stayed dead. Jesus of Nazareth is the only exception. He is risen. He is risen indeed. He is the risen Lord. And I want to leave with you tonight the words of the risen Jesus that he spoke to 2 of his disciples on the way to Emmaus. Listen to his words. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things, and then enter his glory? This is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the 3rd day. And repentance and forgiveness will be preached in his name to all nations, not just to the house of Israel. Repentance in his name is to be preached to all the nations. Go and make disciples of all nations, Jesus said. Baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach them to observe all that I have taught you. That's not an exclusive outreach. That is an outreach to the nations after his resurrection. Jesus was sent to the house of Israel during his earthly ministry. But following his resurrection, he fulfilled the words of the prophets that the Messiah of Israel, the Mashiach Israel, the Messiah of Israel will become a light to the Gentiles. He will become a light to the nations. And the nations would learn of the one God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through his Messiah Jesus. And through Jesus, I have come to know this one God, Yahweh, the one God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I've come to know him personally, in a personal way. I have a relationship with him that will never end. And it's nothing that I have done. It's a gift of God by his grace. And I can live confidently knowing that today, if I die today, I am at peace with my God. I have shalom, I have salam with God. Do you have salam with God tonight? If you die tonight, will you enter the paradise? Do you know for sure? I know because I've trusted in him who can be trusted. Jesus Christ died, buried, risen again, the risen Lord. And I also would like to give to our friend tonight, I'd like to give him a number of gifts. The Passion of Jesus Christ by John Piper, the Jesus video, and a copy of the New Testament. I would like to kindly present it to our guest.
Thank you, Reverend. As I can see people busy writing questions already, if you need a pencil or a pen, there are volunteers available. You can just ask for it and you can have a copy, another pencil and pen available. As you write questions after the presentation, just raise your hand. Volunteer will come by and pick up the questions as well. With this, now I request Mr. Mukhtar Cheema to come over and deliver his presentation.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقولهم إنك قتلت المسيح عيسى ابن مريم رسول الله وما قتلوه وما صلبوه ولكن شبه لهم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The verse of the Holy Quran from chapter 4, verse number 58. Almighty Allah says, and for their sake we did slay the Messiah, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, whereas they slew him not, nor did they bring about his death upon the cross, but he was made to appear to them like one crucified. This is the verse of the Holy Quran. It is true that the majority among you, I mean the Christian, they don't believe in the Holy Quran. But my brother was talking about history. Even if you take the Holy Quran, a book of history, it is 1500 years old, and it is saved from human hand, protected by God. There's no alteration. Take it as little as the book of history. It is written 1500 years, and it says that they said that they crucified, they said that they killed, but in reality, they could not succeed in killing and crucifying him. It is 100% true. It is not what I am saying and I am believing in the Quran and I am quoting from the Quran. It is reality as I said. In the Old Testament, in the book of Psalm, chapter 22, Jesus rendered supplications to God. And it starts with, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. It is in Old Testament, but the same word which Jesus uttered on the cross, it is written in Old Testament, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then in verse number 20, it is mentioned, deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dogs, save me from the lion's mouth. What happened? It is recorded in the book of Psalm, chapter 30, verse number 1 to 12. It says in verse number 2, O Lord my God, I cried unto thee, and thou hast healed me, not resurrected. You have healed me. O Lord, thou hast brought up my soul from the grave. Thou hast kept me alive, not resurrected. You kept me alive. And when you go on, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, verse number 7 to 12, it is mentioned, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter. Then in the verse number 10, yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, not to kill him. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, when thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin. And then it is mentioned, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days. How he saw his days were prolonged, and how he saw his seed, it is in Time magazine, which is research made on Dead Sea Scroll. It is Time magazine, September 21st, 1992, volume 140, number 12. It is about Dead Sea Scroll, the most authentic document which is in this time available. And Barbara Thiering from Australia University, she investigated upon it, and it appeared in Time magazine. It is written, Barbara Thiering of Australia's University of Sydney tells of a Jesus who was crucified but secretly revived at the Dead Sea, and who wed a woman bishop at midnight on March 17, AD 50. Shroud of Turin, that is another document, not document, but that is the picture, and it has been investigated. The Christians say that is not old enough, that prove that really that was the shroud of Jesus. But recently, somebody came forward and she said, this is the original shroud of Jesus, and the man who was wrapped in, he was alive. Let us see what the New Testament says. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse number 22 is that if somebody dies on a cross, he is accursed by God. And Jesus was a noble prophet of God, and a person like Jesus cannot die a cursed death. What is accursed death? According to law of Moses, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse number 28, it is curse if you don't obey the commandment of the Lord your God, that is a curse. And if you obey the commandment of God, that is the blessing from your Lord. Then Jesus himself predicted that he would survive. And he said he will give a great sign, and that is the sign of Jonah, which is mentioned in Matthew chapter 12, verse number 38 to 40. Some scribes and Pharisees went to Jesus and they demanded a sign. And Jesus said, no sign will be given to this evil and adulterous generation except the sign of Jonah. As Jonah remained for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of whale, Son of Man will be for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of earth. And read the book of Jonah. It is a very small book, 1-page book, and it is written that when Jonah went into whale's belly, he was alive. He remained for 3 days and 3 nights alive. And when he was vomited out, he was alive. If Jesus died on the cross, he remained dead on the cross, and he remained dead for 3 days and 3 nights, and then he became alive. There is no similarity with the sign of Jonah. There was no chance for Jonah when he went into whale's belly, but he survived. That is a sign. And there was no chance to survive on the cross. Jesus survived. This is why that is a sign. We believe he did not die on the cross and he was taken alive. Now see how Jesus prayed to God, and his prayers were honored. In Matthew chapter 26, verse number 38-39, he took some of his disciples and he said, my soul is exceeding sorrowful even to death. My soul is exceeding sorrowful even to death. Remain here and watch with me. Then he went a little further, fell down on the ground, and he said, oh my God, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. And that was honored by God. And it is mentioned Luke chapter 22, verse number 42, when he was praying, angel appeared, and he was saying to Jesus, angel appeared unto him from heaven, strengthening him, and he was strengthened, and he was survived. If Jesus wanted to die, if that was the mission of Jesus, why he was reluctant to die? It is mentioned in John chapter 7, verse number 1. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Judea, because the Jews wanted to kill him. If he came to die for mankind, if he was the Lamb of God to die, if he came for that purpose, if that is atonement, why he was reluctant to die? It is mentioned that he was reluctant, he was not going to Judea because the Jews wanted to kill him. John chapter 8, verse number 40. But now ye seek to kill me, a man that had told you the truth. This is what Jesus is saying, that why you are after me, why you are going to kill me. Now the greatest man, if Jesus really died for the sinner, if that was the atonement, a person who assisted Jesus, that should have been be the champion of atonement. And that is Judas Iscariot. He betrayed. He assisted for that mission Jesus wanted to accomplish. Where Judas stands, why he is totally neglected by Christianity, the champion of Christianity. He betrayed, and he was the most important person, the culprit, who handed over Jesus to the hand of the Romans. But Jesus says, Matthew chapter 26, verse number 24, about Judas, it had been good for that man if he had not been born. That is the status of Judas. Then it is, that was not the planning of God, that was planted by devil, according to John chapter 13, verse number 2. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas. So my dear, Jesus did not come for that purpose. Let us go what happened when he was going to the cross. Pilate, who was the main person, who was the main authority, he was going to help Jesus. And he was not ready that Jesus should be hanged. According to John chapter 19, verse number 6, Pilate, when Jesus went into the court, when brought into the court of Pilate, and they said, crucify him, he brought he got some water, the bowl of water, he washed his hand, and he said, "Take him and crucify, for I find no fault in him." Then the same time, he received a message from his wife. And the wife said, "The whole night I was in trouble. That is an innocent person. He should not be punished." And that was a message which was delivered by the wife of Pilate. And that shows that Pilate was not ready to hand over. And that was the main authority. Now just see that if that was the planning of God, if Jesus came for that purpose, and when he was on the cross, God should have been happy that now my son is going to die for the sinners. But that was not so. What happened? Anger of God kindled. Why the anger of God kindled when his son was dying for mankind for the sins? It is mentioned in Matthew chapter 27, verse number 51, verse number 52. Veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rock rent, and the grave were opened. That was the wrath of God, that was the anger of God which kindled, that showed that God was not happy at all. And Jesus was saved from the cross by God. Now when he was taken out, legs were not broken. When they wanted to take Jesus down, and there were two crossmates of Jesus, one on right and one on the other side. Both they were alive. And their bones were broken, their legs were broken, and then they confirmed they were dead, and then they were handed over. And when the soldier approached to Jesus, he realized that he is already dead. What was the criteria in those days to confirm whether somebody is dead or not? That was only if somebody stopped breathing, that is dead. And that is not the criteria to confirm whether somebody is dead or not. And he pierced the side, blood and water gushed out. And that shows that Jesus, the heart of Jesus, that was pumping the blood. This is why the blood came out. Then 100 pounds of medicine were prepared. And the body was wrapped in 100 pounds of medicine. And then that cloth was wrapped upon the body of Jesus. And those medicines are known even up to this day, the ointment of Jesus, which is used for healing the wounds. They say that was the way the Jews they used to bury the people. That is not true. Because after the burial, Mary Magdalene and some other women, they also took ointment. What was the purpose? To take that ointment on Sunday morning, when already Jesus had been buried, when already they applied the bandage around the body of Jesus. They took some ointment again to anoint Jesus. And that is written in Mark chapter 16, verse 1. Mary Magdalene and the Mary mother of James and Salome had brought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. So they came to remove the bandage. Then the prayers of Jesus. I have already mentioned in Old Testament he prayed, and I already mentioned the New Testament he was praying. What happened to the prayers of Jesus? It is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 5 verse 7, that in the days of his flesh, he offered prayers and supplications with great cries and tears to whom who was able to save him from death, and he was heard due to godly fear. In the days of his flesh, when he was alive, in the days of his flesh, he offered prayers and supplications with great cries and tears to whom who was able to save him from death, and he was heard due to godly fear. If his prayers were heard, if his prayers were honored, how I can believe that he died on the cross? Then see what happened. Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene goes there, and I'm cutting short. He reached to the site, and she said, because there were two persons and there were angels. And finally, Jesus was also there, and she took as a gardener. And she talked to Jesus, and she said, where you have laid him, let me take. Mary Magdalene, she was not a superwoman to take the dead body of Jesus. She was saying, where you have laid, tell me, so I should take him. It means that he was alive and she wanted to take along her. Now the testimony of the disciples. When this message reached to the disciples, it is recorded in Mark chapter 16, verse number 9 to 11. And they, when they had heard that he was alive, not resurrected, he was alive, and had been seen of her, believe not. If that was a very common thing, if that was a message given by Jesus that he will be resurrected after 3 days, can you believe the disciple of Jesus, they could not know? Can you believe that they didn't know about that he was going to revive again and he is going to be resurrected? But it is mentioned, when they heard that he was alive, they believed not. And what happened? They think that he was dead, and this is why they said that how it can happen that he is not there and he is gone somewhere. If there were anything recorded in the gospel, if there was any message given by Jesus, then they should have known that this was the message and he has been resurrected and he has gone somewhere. The angel said, it is in Luke chapter 24, verse number 1 ongoing, when they went there, the angels delivered the message to them, to the disciples. Why seek ye the living among the dead? He is living. Why you are looking for a living person among the dead? It means that he was not resurrected. Then Mary Magdalene, when she realized that is Jesus, when she was after Jesus where they laid, and she was talking to the gardener, and she asked where he has laid, and Jesus said, Mary, and she recognized. And when she recognized, she rushed towards Jesus. And she said, Rabboni, my Lord. And she rushed to Jesus, and Jesus said, touch me not. Touch me not. I am not yet ascended to my Father. And this is an idiom in among the Jews, that if somebody dies, they say he has gone to God. And even in my own country, even in India, even in Asia, when somebody dies, they say he has gone to God. And Jesus was close to Mary, and Mary was rushing towards Jesus, and Jesus said, touch me not, I am not yet ascended to my Father. Can you believe that if he had gone to Father, Mary was able to touch him? No, not at all. Because Jesus had wounds, and Mary wanted to grab Jesus. And this is why he said, don't come close to me, don't grab me, touch me not, I am not yet ascended to my Father or my God. Then it is not only one thing. More than Jesus, worse than Jesus, people faced and they were saved. Even Paul, the Christian know it well. In Acts chapter 14, verse number 19, Paul was stoned to death. Paul was stoned to death. He was taken as dead. When I say stoned to death, he was taken by those who stoned Paul that he was dead. And it is recorded 14:19, and there came Jews, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, dragged him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. The next day he came to the city again. That was the first condition of Paul, which is mentioned in Acts chapter 14. He is talking about resurrection. I also believe in resurrection. But let me give you a quote from Luke chapter 24, verse number 44 to 47. It is detailed given by Jesus. It is a wonderful quotation, and we must ponder upon this quotation. What happened? And he said unto them, these are the words which I spake unto you, while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophet, and in the Psalms concerning me. He is quoting Psalms, he is quoting other prophets, he is quoting Moses, and then he wrote, it is written, and thus it be, behold, Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day. He is quoting that it is recorded in Psalms, It is recorded in the book of prophets. It is recorded in the book of Moses. I asked to my Christian brothers, show me from Old Testament this quotation where it is mentioned that he will rise the third day. From Old Testament, and Jesus is quoting it. Show me from Old Testament. He is quoting from Psalms. He is quoting from the prophet. He is quoting from the book of Moses. Show me from Old Testament where this quotation lies. Mark chapter 16, verse number 9 to 11. The disciples didn't know about that. And when they had heard that he was alive, the other disciples, and when they had heard that he was alive and had been seen of her, believed not. Can you believe that Jesus was preaching that I will rise the third day? They will kill me, I will rise the third day. When this message reached to the disciples, they believed not. How it can happen? It means that they didn't know about that. It know that was not the message conveyed by Jesus. It is not what they were thinking about. Now, what is in reality? We have to see what is reality. Psalm chapter 16, verse number 10 is quoting, "For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell." It is David. David is talking about himself. And then he quotes about Jesus. "For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither," this is about Jesus, "neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption." What is that corruption? Paul says, Acts chapter 2, verse number 31. He, seeing this before, spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in hell, neither his flesh did see corruption. His flesh did not see corruption. What is that? His flesh did not decay. And the death is if the body cells start decaying. If his body cells, they were not decayed, if the flesh of Jesus did not decay, he did not die. He was talking about that were cardiac arrest. That was not true. Even this time, a child in Edmonton, he was stoned. He was frozen, became stone. He was taken to hospital, and that revived. Can you believe? That was resurrected? That passed through more than serious condition as compared to Jesus. That happened in this country, in Canada. We have to go after biological death. There is the common death, there is a clinical death, there is biological death. My brother was talking about the clinical death. And even the last century, the clinical death can be revived. But biological death cannot be revived. That is, when the brain stops functioning, then the whole body becomes dead. And this is what he is saying, that his flesh did not see corruption. Now, let us see how the resurrection comes. The resurrection of the dead. It is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse number 41 to 44. The resurrection of the dead, it is sown in corruption. What is resurrection? It is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. Then 43, it is sown in natural body, it is raised in spiritual body. Unless the flesh is decayed, otherwise there is no resurrection. This is what is mentioned. And Jesus, he was showing to the people, see my hand, put finger in it. I am the same. Because if resurrected body is, he becomes like angel, nobody can approach. If Jesus was resurrected body, he should have come boldly to the people, I am resurrected, come form me, and I have overpowered death. And nobody claimed that. Jesus never ever, in New Testament, never ever, Jesus said that I was resurrected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. I thought they would have a difficult job doing presentations. Obviously not. I have a difficult job for asking these questions. There's so many of them. I think we should have had 5 minutes for presentation and 1 hour for questions. What I've tried to do is merge them. There are certain themes in which the question was asked from Mr. Cheema or Reverend Costa. The interesting thing is that the same question is asked from a different perspective. So I will, although the one person simply said ask Mr. Cheema and the other person said ask Reverend Costa, I'm going to ask both of them and merge the questions. So that way we'll try to get some of the questions going. Any more questions coming? Hold them. I have too many already. I think speakers will be available afterwards to go over them as well. So if you're ready, could you please check the mic for me? Perfect. Thank you. One theme which has come onto a number of questions is regards to the witnesses pertaining to the death and resurrection of Jesus. So combining a number of 4 or 5 questions, they refer to the physical testimony of those witnesses. Questions are on the realm of how many people saw Jesus die on the cross, and then how many people physically saw him being resurrected. We'll start with Reverend Costa first.
Pertaining to the question of those who witnessed his death, according to the Gospels are unanimous that a number of Jesus' women disciples were with him at the foot of the cross. The Gospel of John also tells us that his mother, Mary, was there, including one of the apostles, the beloved disciple, John, who in his own Gospel records that he was an eyewitness to the events that transpired on Calvary. And so what we have here is we have the women disciples. The other disciples of Jesus had flown, they had run off after the arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. But there's also another important witness that we have here. We're told in the Gospels that Simon Peter also followed along curiously, but from a distance. He followed along and was privy to some of the details as well. Following the resurrection of Jesus, I noted that the first witnesses were the women witnesses who went to the tomb. The Gospels are unanimous that it was the women who saw him alive again. The men also came to see Jesus alive again. According to Luke 24:34, Simon, the Lord also appeared to Simon, that is Peter, and that is also corroborated for us by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul also gives us a list of witnesses that include the apostles, but he also includes the appearance of Jesus to more than 500 brethren. That is a massive amount of witnesses to the risen Jesus. Paul himself claimed to be a witness to the resurrected Jesus, and he notes that that appearance to Paul was the official commissioning of Paul as an apostle. And so when you look at the Gospels, there's a very, very interesting book that's just been out about a year or so ago by a British New Testament scholar by the name of Richard Bauckham. And Richard Bauckham, in his book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, points out that the Gospels transmit for us reliable first-hand accounts. And he not only mentions Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but he also mentions the reliability of the Gospel of John. So here we have first-century documents that come from the witnesses, those who heard Jesus and those who walked with Jesus. And they all unanimously agree that Jesus was not only put to death, but that he was raised from the dead. And they use the language that means to return from the dead, which was resurrection.
You see, it is not a matter that how many people saw Jesus. According to me, millions after millions people saw Jesus. The main issue is whether he died, was resurrected. In the New Testament, nowhere Jesus ever mentioned that he was resurrected. If somebody saw, he was alive, he had wounds, they were healed, and he came out, and he was after the mission. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, verse number 4 to 5, it is mentioned, and that is related to the statement of Jesus that I have other sheep which are not this fold. I will call my sheep, one day there will be one fold and one shepherd. I am not sent but the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And in the book of Ezekiel, it is mentioned that my sheep were scattered over the mountain, over the high hills, and that is Himalaya. Jesus went towards that area. A book is published, and that is available in the market. It's not written by our community, it is not written by the Muslims, that is written by the Christian scholars among the dervishes. And they investigated the land of Afghanistan, and they came across to one tribe, and the head of the tribe was Abba Yahya, and he said, Jesus traveled to that land, and they have the old writings of that age, the gospel, and they were called Muslim Christians. And they were asked, why you are called Muslim Christian? They said it was the blessing which we received through Jesus, and then later we accepted Islam. There are a lot of things which can be produced from those lands, and Jesus went to Kashmir, and I would say he was seen by millions after million and after million. It is not a matter that how many people saw him. The main issue is whether he was resurrected or not. Very simple. If he was resurrected, according to Bible, it is resurrected body is like angel. Nobody can approach to the angels. No more death after resurrection. If there was no more death, why not Jesus appeared before the Jews and the Romans? That you kill me, I am alive. You kill me, I am resurrected. But he was hiding himself. Why he was hiding? It means that he was not with resurrected body.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. Yeah, I have a number of questions with lengthy quotes from, so obviously people did some study before they came here. I'll leave those for the moment. But one theme which has come along is what really transpired after the crucifixion. The question goes around, and there are a number of them, not what happened to Jesus himself, but what was the state of mind of his disciples, what they believed, and what happened to them, and how did they perceive this incident in their life. The question really, if I have to surmise it, is what was the mindset of the disciples, or people? What did they believe at that time? And how did they portray it, and how did they preach afterwards? In the initial stages of time, not later on, during the time immediately after the crucifixion. Let's start with Reverend Costa.
It's a very good question because it highlights the apprehensiveness of the disciples. The disciples were all Jews, and the Jewish concept of the end of the world and of resurrection was that the resurrection would take place at the end of time. And so when Jesus said to them that he was going to die and rise again, obviously this would be a puzzle to them. They can't understand that. They couldn't conceive of resurrection within history. And that's why I quoted Professor Raymond Brown, who points this out, that the Jewish concept of resurrection is an eschatological one. It's something that happens at the end of the world. And so the disciples of Jesus could not conceive of this idea of a resurrection within history. They were not expecting this type of thing. And scholars do admit that in the first century, the idea of a dying and rising Messiah was something that was not found. They were not looking for a dying and rising Messiah. They were looking for a reigning Messiah who would destroy the Romans. Now, again, this is based on the evidence that we have, not only within the New Testament, but also within first century Judaism. I don't think we've heard any compelling reasons tonight why it is that the early church and the disciples used resurrection language. We haven't heard any good reasons. And the fact that I quoted Luke 24 and verse 44 and following, where Jesus points out that it's written that the Messiah must suffer and that he must rise the third day. Our brother wants to know, where does this third day reference come from? Many scholars believe that it's referred to in Hosea chapter 6, verse 2, where it says that after 2 days you will revive us, and on the third day you will raise us up. And so many believe that the reference to the third day resurrection is found within Hosea's prophecy, Hosea chapter 6 and verse 2. And that's why the resurrection of Jesus could not have been invented by the early followers of Jesus. They weren't expecting it. It couldn't have been the Jews who made it up because they didn't have that type of concept. And that's why the resurrection of Jesus is that unique moment in history that spawned this movement. Now, what I'm telling you tonight is not a debatable issue. Scholars, in our annual meetings of the Society of Biblical Literature, there are no seminars on did Jesus die? It's not even questioned. It's taken as a historical fact. And the fact of the tomb of Jesus being in Kashmir, I've yet to hear a seminar at the SBL Forum where they have discovered the tomb of Jesus. No scholar believes that Jesus is buried in Kashmir. And why is it? Where is the evidence? Now, our brother says, well, he says, I have sheep, I have other sheep that I will call. Well, if I had my Mormon friends up here, the Mormons will tell you, well, those other sheep were the Americans. Jesus appeared in South America. Are those the other sheep that Jesus is talking about? Or maybe it's the English, who are the lost tribes of Israel. Who are the other sheep? Well, the book of Acts tells us who the other sheep are. The other sheep are the Gentiles, who would come into the knowledge of God through Messiah Jesus.
It is a very strange thing for me, but he has quoted Hosea chapter 6, verse number 1 to 2. Due to shortage of time, I did not discuss this matter. I wanted to discuss this. I will read before you. Hosea chapter 6, verse number 1 to 2. Come, come, and let us return unto the Lord. Hosea is saying, come and let us return unto the Lord, for he has torn, and he will heal us. He will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. Not he will be revived. After 2 days will he revive us. And in third day he will raise us up. And we shall live in his sight. This is not what was demanded from me. It is something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. There are a number of questions which go back and forth in terms of what each speaker has said and the other speaker is being asked to comment upon. So I'll take some of those as well. First, to Mr. Reverend Costa, a number of questions referred to the incident of Jonah we mentioned. And the questioner, a number would like to know what your take on that incident in context of what Mr. Cheema said.
Thank you. Yes, that's a very often quoted text. Now, the question that we have to ask in Matthew 12:40 is, what is the comparison that Jesus is making? Now, our friend tonight has suggested that what Jesus is insinuating is that he would be alive just like Jonah was alive in the whale's belly. The problem with this interpretation, first of all, on 2 points. The first point is that a number of biblical commentators are not agreed wholly on whether or not Jonah was alive. Some think he may have died within the belly of the fish, because he speaks in there about crying out from Sheol, which in the Hebrew language is the place of the departed spirits, where the spirits of the dead go. So some commentators are of the opinion that Jonah may have died and was raised by God. But that's not the point. That is not even the analogy that is being drawn by Jesus. If you look at Matthew 12:40 and you compare it with the book of Jonah, what you will notice is that the phrase of parallel here, the parallel phrases that Jesus is referring to, is the 3 days and the 3 nights. Notice the quotation. For as Jonah was in the whale's belly, or the great fish's belly, we're not going to argue about whether it's a mammal or invertebrate tonight. He says, as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man shall be in the heart of the earth for 3 days, 3 nights. What is the parallel? The parallel is the duration of time. In other words, it's the 3 days that is the point of the sign. It's not the status of whether Jonah was alive or not. That's irrelevant. The question is, what is the parallel? The parallel is the duration of the time. And so the third day becomes crucial. Now, our brother was not satisfied with Hosea 6, 1 to 2. The reason why I brought up Hosea 1 to 2 is simply because scholars have seen the analogy there to the third day. But I noticed that in his presentation, he was quoting from Psalm 30, verse 2, and it says Jesus is speaking. No, he's not. That's David who's speaking in Psalm 30, verse 2. Not Jesus. He quotes these Old Testament passages and says Jesus is saying that. Psalm 22 was uttered by David. Read the superscript, a Psalm of David. Jesus quotes from the Psalm of David because he is identifying himself with the suffering servant there. So the 3 days, the analogy is the duration of time, because the sign is that it is the third day that Christ would rise from the dead. That's the sign.
Thank you, Reverend Costa. One question, and that's why I want to give him the passage from Mr. Cheema, is that you mentioned that Jesus was merely a prophet of God. In that context, please explain the meaning of John 14:16. 6.
If Jesus was mere a prophet, please explain the meaning of John 14:6. Okay, quote it. What is? Read it. You read something.
14 verses.
Okay. John 14:6. And Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well.
Yeah.
From now on, you
Yeah,
will
I
know.
do. Yes, welcome. Jesus said, I am the way, truth, and life. No one can come to the Father except through me. It is from Adam to this time, all the prophets, they are conveying the same message. Nobody can approach to God unless he passes through that prophet. And Jesus said in John chapter 9, verse number 6, as long as I am in this world, I am the light of the world. And he is no more in this world. He is no more light of this world. So he was the prophet of God. He conveyed the message of God. And in a wonderful way, Jesus said, in John chapter 17, verse number 1, 2, and 3, Jesus said, this is life eternal. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. La ilaha illallah, there is none worthy of worship, and Jesus is the messenger of Allah. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Is not a messenger, is not a prophet of God. When after crucifixion, Jesus was going to Emmaus, on the way his own disciple, Cleopas, and another person, they met Jesus and they were talking together about crucifixion. And Jesus said, what are you talking about? And Cleopas said, are you a stranger in this city? He said, what are you talking? He said, we are talking about the prophet of God who was crucified. And that is a disciple of Jesus. If the disciple of Jesus is saying that he was a prophet of God who was crucified, where we stand to decide he was not a prophet of God.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. Again, keeping the theme of what's being said by each presenter, Reverend Costa, one question regards to, actually the theme that refers to is the death on the cross as being accursed. So I'll just take one sample question, there are many on the same theme. It says to Reverend Costa, please explain the Ahmadiyya interpretation that the God could not have been killed. So Jesus' death on the cross, as that would have been tantamount to him having been a cursed death. Your impression of that.
First of all, Christians do not claim that God was killed. We believe that Jesus is the incarnate Word, God made flesh. We believe that it is his humanity that was given up. In Islam, there's the view that the Quran is the eternal word of Allah, Kalimatullah, and that the Quran is both eternal and finite in the sense that the written book made of pages with ink, if I take that book and I burn that book, I have not killed the Quran, I have not destroyed the Quran. I may have killed or destroyed the material, but the Word of God is eternal, indestructible. So Jesus Christ gave his life for us in terms of his humanity. That's why the Word had to become flesh, so that he could surrender his life. Now, this idea of the curse, yes, Deuteronomy 21:23 says, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. And that expression, to be hanging on a tree, came to mean, in the first century, to be crucified as well. But if you notice what Paul says, the Apostle Paul, you have to realize prior to Paul's becoming a believer in Jesus, one of the reasons why Paul opposed the Christian movement was because they dared to claim that this crucified Messiah, which was a scandal to the Jews, an oxymoron, a crucified Messiah was unthinkable to the Jewish mind. Paul would have attacked the Christian movement because he thought that this was a blasphemous claim to state that the Messiah would be crucified. But in Paul's letter to the Galatians, notice what he says. He says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. It's not that Jesus himself was cursed for something he did. because the Bible tells us that he was sinless and spotless, but that he became a curse for us. In other words, like that sacrificial victim in the Old Testament, those animals that the high priest would put his hands on top of the head of these animals and he would confess the sins of Israel, and then they would slaughter this animal. Jesus became a curse not for himself, not because of something he did. Paul says Jesus Christ became a curse on behalf of sinners, because as sinners, you and I are lawbreakers. Every one of you in this room, every one of us is guilty of breaking God's law. There's no one in this room who could say, I have perfectly obeyed the law of God, the Ten Commandments. Not one of us. We're all under God's condemnation. And Christ bore the penalty. He took the penalty on our behalf. And that's why it's crucial for us to understand this. That's why the disciples had a problem with the death of Jesus. Because look at the way he died. How could the Messiah, the King of Israel, die this way? But they came to realize after the resurrection, when God vindicated Jesus, that Jesus' death was in fact a sacrificial death. And he bore the sins of his people. And that's why they could receive forgiveness and mercy and grace.
Thank you, Reverend Costa. This is again quotation, question being asked, Mr. Cheema. Says, and again, the theme on regards to Isaiah 53, verse 7 to 10. Question request that you have given full detail, however, a portion of that phrase, of these verses, that talks about he was cut off from the land of the living. The 2 or 3 different versions are given. I presume they're looking at different references. But nevertheless, this is the theme. Could you please elaborate on this phrase?
That is a long quotation, and a part of quotation I quoted, that his days will be prolonged, he will see his seed. And that is related to that part. His days were prolonged. They wanted to cut short the days of Jesus. He was put on the cross when he was 33 years old. If he died, then they cut short the days. But it is predicted that his days would be prolonged. And according to historical fact, he remained up to the age of 120 years. He preached the word of God. He accomplished his mission. And really, if we see that he was 30 years old and he was 120 years old, in 120 years old, his days were prolonged. He will see his seed. If he died on the cross, was resurrected, was ascended to heaven, where goes this part of the prediction? He will see his seed. And this is what I gave you quotation from that Dead Sea Scrolls, which is investigated by the Christian and the Jewish scholars. The Barbara thing, she is from Australia University, and she said Jesus married in the age of 50. If he married, there's no record of the children. And it is not that the whole record of whole life is there. But it goes according to that Jesus really, his days were prolonged and he saw his seed. And there's a lot of evidence in the eastern countries that really the Jews, they were there, and Jesus and his disciples, they also visited that land. In India, there's a grave of Thomas. And he remained for the whole life. He died there. In the same way, there is a tomb of Jesus in Kashmir. And that is known, the tomb of Jesus. And the people know that was the person, that was the prophet who migrated 2,000 years back. And he preached the word of God. And he died ultimately there, and his grave is there. So you have to decide which part you are going to accept and which part you are going to reject. It is very clear his days will be prolonged. He will see his seed. He was cut, his days were cut from the living, that he was living a very happy life. And the people, they dislike him, as it happened in the time of all the prophets. No prophet you can show from the history that the people accepted him. The same thing happened to Jesus of Nazareth. And he was tortured and he left that land. As it happened to Abraham, he was tortured and he was migrated to another land. It happened to different other prophets, and it is the history of the prophets. So he wanted to live in that land that was cut short, and he migrated to another land. and his days were prolonged, and he saw his seed.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. Now there's another theme of questions regarding the events of the crucifixion itself, or immediately after crucifixion. So I'll merge them together. First, the questions which have been asked from the Reverend Costa. The theme is that it is known, according to the references, that Jesus was put on the cross on Friday and was taken down after a few hours. And then the other question is, I would have been quoted by Mr. Cheema. The question really is, what is your understanding of his death, and how is it possible for them that he actually died in a few hours, despite being legs not being broken and other evidence which has been discussed?
Well, the evidence, I think, is pretty borne out well in the gospel accounts. And that is, in Mark's gospel, for instance, we're told about Pilate's surprise that Jesus had died so soon. But what we have to realize is that when we take into consideration the amount of torture that was inflicted on Jesus, we're told that he experienced the Roman flogging, the Roman whip. According to Josephus, many people who endured the Roman flogging, many of them never survived. Many of them died at the whipping post. It was so severe and so bloody that the victims would not be able to survive it. Look at the case of Jesus. He doesn't even have the strength to carry the crossbeam to the place of crucifixion. And this is an indicator that he was already experiencing very, very deep exhaustion and fatigue at this point. But the most compelling evidence is that given in the Gospel of John with the piercing of the side of Jesus. You will notice that it mentions the water and the blood, and our friend mentioned tonight that this indicates that the heart of Jesus was still beating. I will submit to you that if you have your heart pierced, you're not going to be living for too long. And secondly, the appearance of the blood and the water. John points out that he saw both blood and water coming forth. And this has been substantiated in various medical reports, that when someone has died of a severe death like that of crucifixion, they have noted that the pericardial membrane, which is the membrane that envelops the heart, inflates. And inside this membrane, there's an accumulation of what's called pericardial fluid, which is a clear-like fluid that looks like water. And this could account for what we have explained by John, this mixture of the blood and the water. Now, why did they not break his legs? Well, the Gospel of John tells us that they broke the legs of the thieves because as the Sabbath was drawing on, it was Friday afternoon, with the setting of the sun on Friday, this would bring on the Sabbath. And so because they were still alive, the Romans would practice what's known as crudifragium, which is the breaking of the legs of the victim, because crucified victims, in order to stay alive, they had to raise themselves up and allow the ribcage to expand and to breathe. But because it says Jesus was already dead, they did not break his legs. But just in case, to ensure that he was really dead, they pierced his side. And this fulfilled the prophecy that we find in Zechariah 12:10, where the Lord says, "They shall look upon me, whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child." And the medical report that I referred you to earlier, the Journal of Medical, the American Journal of Medical Science, points out that Jesus was already dead prior to the piercing of his side. He had already experienced death. And just to leave you with this thought, Isaiah 53 is very, very clear. And all you have to do is read the last verse of 53. "Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death." It's right there, folks. "And he was numbered with the transgressors, for he," listen to this, "for he bore the sins of many." So Jesus of Nazareth recognized that this prophecy referred to him, to his suffering, to his death, and he said that he had come to give his life as a ransom for many. And we must ask the question again tonight. If our brother is right, that Jesus did not die, that Jesus traveled to Kashmir, then why is it that no New Testament scholar, if there is one, I'd like to know who he is or she is, why is it that no New Testament scholar has recognized this, or documented this, or investigated these claims? I submit to you they don't, because it's not credible. The evidence doesn't bear that.
Thank you, Mr. Costa.
You see that Genesis?
Actually, the question I have goes towards that anyway, so let me do this. The question refers to, and this is again the theme of the mission of Jesus and his life after crucifixion and then Christian perspective resurrection. The question I ask is, what is your belief that, and the evidence that not only Jesus was not dead at the time of crucifixion, that part is granted there, that he actually had a ministry beyond those days, and he actually traveled and had other disciples, other places as well.
You see, all the prophets, as we believe that Jesus was a prophet of God, and every prophet is given a task to do, accomplish it. He was given the mission. And according to the Holy Quran, according to the biblical evidence, what we can find in Old Testament and New Testament, my brother was talking about the New Testament. A book is written, the 5 Gospels, of more than 100 scholars, Christian scholars, they wrote that book. And they wanted to get the real words of God from the New Testament. And there are a couple of verses, only a couple of verses, they found really 100% words of God. But that is not the issue to discuss. But Jesus was to accomplish his mission, and according to New Testament and the Old Testament, I have already quoted, Jesus said, "This is my mission. I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." He was not after the other tribes. He gave this direction to his disciples even. When he was dispatching them for preaching, he said, "Do not go to the house of Gentiles and preach to the Jews." And Jesus and all of the disciples, they were going to accomplish that mission. James writes in it, in James chapter 1, verse number 1 and 3, he greets, "This is my greeting to all the 12 tribes spread outside." James is also concentrating upon the same thing, but it was Paul, and there was a great controversy between the disciples of Jesus and Paul, and they clearly said that Jesus was sent towards the lost tribes of Israel. He was not after Gentiles. Paul said, "If you are not going to preach to the Gentiles, then I am leaving," and he left with Barnabas. The rest of the disciples, they did not agree with Paul, because they knew well what they heard from Jesus, that he was given a task, he was given a mission, and that was to preach the word of God to the other tribes. And he went to that land, and he was after those tribes. As I said, he remained a part of his life in Afghanistan, northern part of Iran, and then he went to Kashmir, and there are a lot of evidence. There is one grave in Pakistan, and that is the grave of Mary. There is another grave in the northern part of India, and that is also after the name of Mary. And there are, if you see the names of different areas, different peoples, they are the Hebrew names. So all tribes, those who were living in that area, in Kashmir and in Afghanistan and the northern part of Iran, they were the Jews. If you go to their graveyard, you will see the tombstones. They are in Hebrew. So Jesus was after those tribes, and he accomplished his mission, and in the age of 120 years, he died a natural death, as it was mentioned in the Holy Quran, that they would not succeed in killing him, but he would die a natural death caused by Almighty God. It was not the mission of Jesus that he would die for the sinners. And this is not mentioned in Old Testament even, that somebody should die for the others. One thing is mentioned, that evil should die for the righteous and transgressor for the uprights. This is the ransom which is mentioned in Old Testament. And it is beyond imagination that a higher species, they are going to die for the lower species. We give offering the lower species for human being, not we offer the sacrifice of mankind for the lower species. Have you ever seen that somebody slaughter his son for his goat? That goat was sick and he is going to slaughter his own son? No, we slaughter the goat for human being. How God sent his own son to die for the sinners, while it is mentioned in Proverbs chapter 21 verse number 8, the evil will be ransomed for the righteous and transgressor for the upright. That is the criteria which is given in the Old Testament.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. As you know, questions keep coming, so I really have to wrap it somehow. So this is the second last question of the theme. The number of questions regards to the divinity of Jesus and his life as a messenger from both perspectives. So I think one question really sums it up, so I'll just read that. The questioner wants to know from both speakers, could you shed some light on the phrase, Son of God, from your own perspective? What do you feel that phrase means? Start with this process.
Well, words mean what they mean in context. Every word has to be determined respectively based on its own context. So when the Quran, for instance, talks about someone who is an Ibn Sabil, a son of the road, it doesn't mean that the road begets children. It means that that person is a traveler. And so in the Bible, the word son is used in various contexts. It could refer to a biological child of a man and a woman. It can also refer to someone who has the attributes of something. For instance, when Jesus spoke about the son of peace, he meant someone who was of a peaceful disposition. When he spoke of his enemies as children of the devil, he meant that they were evil, that they were set against him. But when Jesus spoke of himself as God's son, he spoke of himself as son in a very different way. If you look at Matthew 11:27 and Luke 10:22, Jesus said, "No one knows the Father but the Son, and no one knows the Son but the Father, and whoever the Son wishes to reveal the Father to." Jesus spoke of himself in very intimate terms with God. He would refer to God as Abba, as Father. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus is given a special term. He is called the monogenes hoios. Now in the King James translation, it has come to be translated as the only begotten Son of God. And this term, only begotten, unfortunately has led to a lot of misunderstanding, particularly in Islam, which takes this word to mean sexual begel, or sexual generation. The word only begotten, the word monogenes, means one of a kind, unique. And so when Jesus is spoken of as God's son, he speaks of himself in a unique way. Why did the Jews want to kill him for making that claim? When Jesus spoke of God as Father, it says the Jews were determined to kill him because not only did he break the Sabbath, but he called God his Father. Now, if calling someone God's son was simply a reference to a righteous person, then why did the Jews want to kill Jesus for blasphemy? What was blasphemous about claiming to be God's son, or claiming to be one with God? Now, earlier you heard our brother was quoting from John 17, where Jesus spoke about knowing the true God and Jesus Christ whom you sent, but one verse he did not read, and that's verse 5, John 17, verse 5, where Jesus says, "Father, glorify me with the glory that I had with you before the world was made." Now tell me, which prophet ever claimed to be with God at the beginning of time, creating the universe, bringing life into existence? Which prophet ever made that claim? Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Muhammad? Never, not one of them. Jesus claimed to be not only with the Father, but in eternal fellowship with the Father. And so this is why the sonship of Jesus has to be determined and interpreted based on the context in which that phrase appears. You can't take the word son and just say, it just means this. You have to look at the context. Jesus knew he was the Son of God. He spoke of himself as the Son of God. The last one that was sent was God's Son. And he spoke of that intimate relationship that he had with God as Father and Son. No one knows the Father but the Son. No one knows the Son but the Father. It's an intimate knowledge, an intimate relationship that he shares, and only he can reveal the Father to us.
see, when we study the Bible, it becomes very clear. Jesus was talking in metaphor, and he explained it. John chapter 10, verse number 31 to 35. The Jews picked the stone to stone him. And Jesus said, "Why you stone me? I have shown you so many good works." They said, "Not for good works, but for blasphemy. You being a man makes yourself God." And Jesus said, that was a time to say that really I am God or I am Son of God. He said, "Why you stone me? I have shown you so many good works." And they said, "Not for good works, but for blasphemy. You being a man makes yourself God." And Jesus said, "Is it not written in your law, ye are gods?" In Exodus chapter 7, verse 1, number 1, God talked to Moses, "O Moses, O Moses, I made thee God, and thy brother Aaron thy prophet." Same God is talking to Jesus. And that is really what Jesus is going to explain to them. Is it not written in your law, ye are gods? And that is in the law of Moses, in Torah, Exodus chapter 7, verse 1. My brother asked me that show me anywhere that any prophet was before creation, claimed. The Prophet of Islam, he said that kuntu khataman nabiyyin wa adamu bain al-ma'i wa teen, that I was the seal of the prophet even when Adam was in mud. Adam was not created when he was the seal of the prophet. Then he said, any prophet claimed to create the heaven and earth? The Prophet of Islam said, even our own prophet who appeared in this age, who is subordinate prophet to the Holy Prophet, Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and he said, a new earth and a new heaven will be created with me. And in the same way, a new heaven and a new earth was created through Jesus. In the same way, new heaven and the new earth was created through Moses. Prophet comes to establish a great thing for human being, the paradise on earth. And that is a new heaven and the new earth. And they came for that purpose. It is not that materially the new heaven and the new earth was created by Jesus. A person who didn't know even when he went to the fig tree and he was after a fruit, and when he approached there was no fruit at all, and that was not the season of the fruit, and he cursed to the fig tree. Can you believe a person who created heaven and earth, who was before creation, he was not able to create one single fruit from that fig tree? So what Jesus was saying, that the heaven and the earth is created through me, it is the same as heaven and earth is being created through the founder of Ahmadiyya Muslim community in this age. As the heaven and the earth was created by the Holy Prophet of Islam. All the prophets that did it, we believe in it. Jesus was talking in metaphor, and we have to understand the metaphors.
Thank you, Mr. Cheema. One of the privileges of the hard work the moderator does is to get to ask the last question, and they can make it up anything they like. But I was pleased to, the question when it came from the audience is closer to what I had in mind anyway, so I won't take the credit. The question came from the audience. So this is for both speakers. Person thanks both of them and would like to know their perspective on why do they think that the topic of today's event is it relevant and important in this day and age? Mr. Costa.
That's a wonderful question. I think a very good.
I would have taken credit for it.
Okay, that's all right. Well, Christmas is here. And why is it that Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus? The promise that was given to Joseph, the husband of Mary, when she had conceived in her womb by the Holy Spirit the Christ child, the promise was, you shall give him the name Yeshua, for he shall save his people from their sins. And therefore, the reason why Jesus came into the world was specific. He had a purpose. He didn't come just to throw out some nice words here and there, some wisdom teachings. He came for a purpose, and that purpose was to save his people from their sins. And he accomplished that act of salvation. He came into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world through him may be saved. But the world in its rejection of his light stands condemned before a holy God. Why is the death of Jesus absolutely essential? Because Jesus said, "It is for this reason that I have come into the world, to give my life as a ransom for many, to lay down my life for my sheep." Those who are not of his sheep will not understand this. That's why he said to the religious leaders, "You are not of my sheep. If you were, you would hear my voice and you would follow me." The reason why people don't see is, Paul says, the God of this age has blinded their minds so that the glorious light of the gospel of Christ will not enter in. And therefore, if the death of Jesus is central to the gospel, which it is, Paul says the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and if this is the power of God unto salvation, then it stands to reason that if we reject this atonement, this sacrifice that has been paid by the very Son of God, then your eternal destiny hangs in the balance tonight. Either Jesus Christ is who he said he was, or he isn't. They both can't be true. One of us up here is wrong. If he is who he said he is, if he did what he said he would do, then your eternal destiny rests in the balance. And Jesus said, "He who has the Son has life. But whoever does not have the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God will abide upon that person." And so, Christmas is not so much about a little baby lying in a manger, but it's about one who came into the world to fulfill a purpose. He came in fulfillment of the prophecies. The prophet said the Messiah would come. Isaiah said he would pour out his life unto the death. He bore the sins of many, and he made intercession for the transgressors. Read Isaiah 53 tonight. I challenge you tonight, Muslim and Christian, Jew, Hindu, whatever you are, Buddhist here tonight. Read Isaiah 53 very carefully and ask yourself, who could this be referring to? Look at the expressions of his sufferings. Notice how he pours out his life unto death. And ask yourself the question, if Jesus Christ is who he said he was, if he came to make us right with God, to give us peace with God, if we reject that, we reject eternal life. Now, when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he wasn't saying, if you follow my teachings, you're going to be saved. Moses never said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." None of the prophets ever claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus Christ made that claim. And the reason why he made that claim is because he is the truth. He is the truth. You shall know the truth shall make you free. If the Son sets you free, you shall be free indeed. And so, the challenge is given to you tonight. You have heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you are now responsible for what you do with that gospel. And I pray that you make peace with God tonight. Don't leave this place tonight without making peace with God, because if tomorrow I die, or if tomorrow you die, what will you say before Almighty God? Why should he let you into his paradise if you have broken his law and violated his holy commands? What is your justification before this holy God? My justification is that Jesus Christ took my place, and I plead his blood. I plead his perfection. He did it all. All to him I owe.
Mr. Cheema, your perspective on the importance of the Christ.
It is a very relevant topic. From my understanding, to get the people on the right track, if we study the history of the religions, if we study the history of the prophets, it happened in the time of all the prophets. They could not understand the real meanings of the prophecies. The same thing happened in the time of Jesus. The same thing happened in the time of John the Baptist. When John the Baptist came, Then Jews went to him and they said, in which capacity you are baptizing the people? John chapter 1 verse number 19. In which capacity you are baptizing the people? And they said, are you the Messiah? He said, no, I am not Messiah. Are you Elijah? No, I am not Elijah. Are you that prophet? He said, no, I am not that prophet. And he was rejected. Then, the same age, the same time, Jesus appeared and they sent their scholars. And they said, we are waiting for Elijah and you are claiming to be Messiah. Why they said? Because it is very clear in the Old Testament, in the book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 11 ongoing. Elijah and Elisha, they were walking on the bank of the river Jordan. And the chariot of fire appeared. Chariot of fire appeared from heaven. And Elijah was taken to heaven, and Elisha was eyewitness. And he cried, my father, and Elijah disappeared. In the last book of Old Testament, in the book of Malachi chapter 4 verse 5, it is predicted about coming of Elijah. I will send you Elijah the prophet. These are the words. In the last book of Old Testament, the book of Malachi chapter 4 verse 5, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and dreadful days of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the hearts of the fathers to the children. Is it wrong? Is it not in the Old Testament? Is it not authentic book? That is the word of God, describing about ascension of somebody, describing about coming of the same person. But what happened? Jews went to Jesus and said, we are waiting for Elijah. And Jesus said, forget about Elijah. Nobody has gone to heaven and nobody will come. Matthew chapter 11 verse number 13, 14. If you are ready to believe, that is John the Baptist. A person who was taken to heaven in the chariot of fire. Another prophet is eyewitness. Another prophet is predicting about his coming. And Jesus saying, forget about that. Where Jesus stands. This is why up to this time Jews, they did not believe in Jesus. They say, we are waiting for Elijah, we will accept Elijah, then after that Elijah we will believe in Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus or Messiah, whatever. So this is the time to tell the people that it happened in all the ages. They could not recognize a very great prophet which is mentioned in book of John chapter 1 verse number 19 I have quoted. Jews, they were waiting for three prophets. One was Messiah, the other was Elijah, the third was that prophet. Where is that prophet? He was a very great prophet. And my brother, he quoted during his opening speech, a child is given, a son is given. To us a child is given, to us a son is born. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. That is the prophet which is mentioned in the book of John chapter 1 verse 19. He was mighty God. He was everlasting Father. He was Prince of Peace. And he was a wonderful counselor, which is mentioned in that. That is an entirely different topic. But this meeting is organized to tell the people how we should understand the scriptures. The people, they deviated from the right course, as happened in the time 2,000 years back. In the time of Jesus, they could not recognize Jesus. And Jesus wanted to open their eyes. Forget about that. Nobody has gone to heaven. Nobody will come again. The same thing is taken by the Christian, that somebody has gone to heaven and he will come back. And we are going to open these ideas before you, that ponder upon it, think about this, whether you are right or wrong. As it happened 2,000 years back, it can happen again. That prophet appeared 1,500 years back, another prophet came in the second advent of Christ. And we are the believer of Jesus of Nazareth. We are the believer of Moses. We are believer of Abraham. We are believer of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And we are the believer of the latter-day Messiah who appeared in this age. So that was the purpose, to talk, to share the thought. I am very thankful to you, and I am very happy that you talk about your religion, we talk about our religion, and every person has a different opinion. You have different, I have opinion, I have different opinion, but it gives us a chance to ponder upon the teachings through different angles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have many, many more questions. I couldn't even get to the questions which are not relevant to the topic. They were actually more fun. Just take one. I mean, someone asked me, wanted to know about how to keep, abide by the 10 Commandments. That probably would take a whole day.
I can answer that if you'd like.
In less than 1 minute? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
You want to abide by the 10 Commandments? Here it is. Love God with everything, with your heart, your mind, your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. You love God with everything, you won't blaspheme his name, you won't worship idols, you love your neighbor, you won't steal from him, you won't dishonor his parents, you won't commit adultery with his spouse. Love, love, love. God is love.
You see, this is the main purpose of coming of Latter-day Messiah, and not only his mission, it is the mission of all the prophets, to unite mankind with God and to unite mankind with each other. And it is mentioned in the Holy Quran, وَاتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold fast the rope of Allah all together and be not divided. That is the main purpose of coming of that Latter-day Messiah. Our slogan is, love for all, hatred for none. We are being persecuted more than anyone, but still we love those, even our persecutor. This is what Jesus said, that love even your persecutors so that you may be the children of your Father who is in heaven. So this is our message to all. That love each other, love mankind, and be united with God, be united with each other. If somebody is not able to understand his fellow brothers or sisters, he cannot understand about God. This is the main purpose of our community, and this is the message of Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Thank you very much. We could go on forever, but however, we are very honored to have the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Canada amongst us, Mr. Lal Khan Malik. So I'll request him to please come to stage and offer our appreciation to Reverend Costa, and also we'll conclude the program with his comments.